One of the most common questions I hear from people that want to learn to program is, which language should I start with? And I wouldn't be making this video if I was going to tell you the answer that you've probably already heard. So before I give you my top 3 considerations for picking your first programming language, I'd love to hear from you in the comments, which languages have you been told that you should pick up first? By the way, I have a guess what number 1 probably is. Alright, and if you stick around to the end of this video, you can learn how to program your very first application in maybe a different language that you weren't considering. So stay right to the end and I'll have a link to that you can go watch. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and let's get right into it. Okay, so the language we always hear that people should start with is, of course, Python. I have absolutely nothing against Python. I think it's a great language, but it's the language that's always pushed on new beginner programmers to go learn it first. So one of my first considerations when picking a programming language actually ties into probably why many people start with Python. And that is, if you're just learning about how programming actually works, Python gives you a language that's very easy to understand in terms of the syntax that you would be writing out in that language. So because Python has a simple syntax, this will allow you to focus on the programming concepts versus fighting with your code and trying to make sure it's compiling properly just because you missed a semicolon somewhere or maybe a curly brace. So to reiterate, reason number 1 is really just if you have an interest, picking a super low barrier to entry language like Python might be a really great option. So consideration number 2 that I like to focus on is actually the use case of what you're trying to program. So what does that even mean? Depending on what you're trying to create, there's different software languages that are often better suited or more commonly suited for creating those types of things. So a simple example might be JavaScript. Maybe JavaScript is something you've heard of for web development. So if you were thinking about trying to create a website, perhaps JavaScript is something that you might want to learn first because the examples that you would be looking at are actually more aligned with the types of things that you'd like to build. And the more you learn about JavaScript, the more you'll learn that it's not just a front-end web language. It's actually used to create web servers too. So that means when we're considering JavaScript as an option, that might let you make the front end of a website and it might let you make the back end of a website as well. So then is JavaScript the best language to learn? Well, not necessarily. Perhaps if we consider another language like C#, if we consider some of the details about C#, we might learn that yes, we can also create front ends of websites as well in C#. And, of course, we could go create web servers in C#. In fact, there's C# support to be able to create Android and iOS applications as well. One of the big limitations of C# historically used to be that it would only run on Windows machines, so a lot of people didn't even consider C# as a language to start with. Depending on what some things people might have been building, they would say, well, if I can only build on Windows, then I don't want to go learn this language, because perhaps I only need to create software on Linux machines. With .NET Core, we're actually able to create C# applications that run on both Windows and Linux. So does that mean that C# is then the best language for people to start with? Again, not necessarily. But to recap on consideration number 2, in my opinion, it's really important to think about what types of things you're interested in building. And then from there, if you start searching the internet for, say, something like building websites, programming languages, you might be able to pick up on some of the top languages that are used for those types of things. And that brings us to consideration number 3 that I want to talk about today, which is support for the languages. So imagine for a second that you're about to go invest your time learning a new programming language. If you found out that this programming language was actually something that was used 15, 20 years ago and not many more people were developing in it anymore, and perhaps there was no good new tooling coming out for it, and perhaps there was no more community support for it because that was dying off, would that seem like a good programming language to learn first? Well, perhaps if it lines up with the first 2 considerations, you still might want to jump into it. However, this might be a consideration that you want to weigh in because if you're about to go invest all of this time into learning it, perhaps you want to have something that's well supported by a community, where that community is creating content around that programming language and providing modules for you to be able to incorporate into your own code as well. And of course, as technology is advancing, if the programming language that you picked is not really keeping up with the rest of technology, you might find that you're not able to go build those cool things with the language that you picked. And that's going to bring us to our conclusion, where I want to highlight one more thing, which is that there isn't a right or wrong answer to this. In general, when you go to learn a programming language, the concepts that you learn in that language will be applicable to other programming languages. You might be investing a little bit more time to practice the syntax in one and then have to go do that in another programming language. But ultimately, if you're learning about if statements and loops and how other things work in the language, you'll be able to apply those things to the next language as well. So I just want to leave you with a word of encouragement, which is don't keep waiting to find the perfect programming language to start with, and just get started now. And actually, you can do that by looking at this video right here.